the women still alive today, or the children of some of the women alive today. And I've read interviews and heard stories of that time. I mean, and you can watch videos of when eventually a group of women that also sang gospel songs traveled around the country sort of with the exhibitions and would come to the openings and meet people and perform. They would sing and talk to other quilt makers and people that came to the museums. And so you can watch some of that footage. And every time you can see these women walk into the gallery and see their quilts on the wall, and you can see like the excitement, and also, some of them kind of laugh. Some of their kids kind of laugh too, because it is still this thing of, they made this quilt to sleep under, or a kid remembers sleeping under it, and now it's up on the wall. I mean, I can only imagine that it was
life-changing
so
for
powerful.
that whole community.
Yeah.
I can imagine. So he buys the quilts, and then they are exhibited. That's the big moment, right? So where do they get exhibited first?
The first show was at the Whitney Museum.
That's huge.
In
right?
New York.
Whitney is a big deal. So that's a huge, big deal. How did that happen?
So at the time, Maxwell Anderson was the director of the Whitney, who's now the president of the Souls Grown Deep Foundation. And Max had also spent some time as the director of the Carlos Museum at Emory in Atlanta, which is where he first met Bill and saw the work. And Max worked with Bill on the original Souls Grown Deep exhibition in 1996 for the Atlanta Olympics. And so Max was already interested in this work and sort of interested in what Bill was doing. And it was through Max that the show was placed there.
And what was the response to the show?
I think it is still the most attended show at the Whitney. They extended the closing date multiple times. There's tons of photos of the line like wrapped around the building for people
Amazing.
to see it. And it was not supposed to travel past the Whitney, and then it quickly did, and it resulted in a second show, Architecture of the Quilts, which traveled to multiple venues. And I mean, we still get requests to show quilts almost weekly.
That's amazing. Okay, so the next part of the story is really interesting. So the women's quilts have been bought up. They're now in the really important museum in the U.S. They're traveling. And then what happens to the community, and sort of what's the economic and sort of what's the cultural, how does this affect them economically and also culturally? Because then they have licensing deals and other things start to happen, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think that this is part of where the story gets a little complicated. It's a small community, and there were a lot of quilt makers that were phenomenal. There were a lot of quilt makers that Bill, wasn't that interested in.
Uh-huh.
There were a lot of people that weren't making quilts at the time. And, there is not as much, I think most artists will tell you, there is not as much money as you presume to come from when your artwork is bought and then exhibited in a museum.
Yeah.
And so I think there was a certain economic upturn for some of the women and their families. But by and large, the community is still very impoverished. And I think that the lasting economic effect of that sort of like mid-2000s phenomenon, late 2000s phenomenon, have dwindled, I would say, for sure, which is why the foundation has really made it a focus to bring attention back to Gee's Bend, and also the work that we're doing with Artists' Rights Society to put in place these licensing agreements with a lot of the women and their family.
Yeah, tell me more about the Artists' Rights Society and how you've connected with that.
Well, I mean, it's something that a lot, like the sort of history of, if you want to look, we don't consider this art to be made by self-taught or outsider artists, but certainly a lot of the artists in our collection have been written about or exhibited as such. And if you sort of look at the history of that work, most of the artists and their descendants have not economically benefited at all. A lot of times institutions don't even have permission from the artist or their family to be publishing images of the work.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll see in catalogs a sort of generic line that says every effort was made to contact the appropriate heirs or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And one day we saw this line, we were looking at a catalog and just thought, like, is this true? And in Gee's Bend, there are still quilt makers alive and there are still people quilting. The Gee's Bend Quilt Collective is a place that you can visit and buy quilts from them.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just started thinking, like, what can we do about this? And we contacted Artists' Rights Society to just, bring up this possibility of them working with us,
mm-hmm.
but it would be sort of an unusual way of working because in a lot of instances, we'd have to find the heirs or the artists, and we would have to go to them and then explain to them what we were doing, explain about artists' rights, and get them to sign up. It wasn't going to be these artists going to Artists' Rights Society and
right.
signing up, which is normally how it works.
Right.
And so Artists' Rights Society was, and particularly Janet Hicks, who was their director of permissions, was super excited about this idea and has been so generous with her time and her knowledge and flexible with her understanding in allowing Scott, who's my coworker, and I, and Mary McCarthy, who I spoke about earlier, who still is an indispensable help to us, along with another woman named Mary Margaret Petway, who is a board member of Souls Grown Deep and a quilt maker herself, and the daughter of Lucy T. Petway, who's considered one of the masters of Gee's Bend. The four of us have sort of formed a team, and ARS has allowed us to just sign people up, and then they'll retroactively sign for us so that we can really be on the ground doing this work in the community.
And what benefit have you seen? Have you seen any benefit yet to being connected to Artists' Rights Society for the artists?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's been one of the most rewarding. I mean, this job I'm so lucky to be here, and one of, I think, the best jobs I will ever have in my entire life.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff that's rewarding, but some of the experiences that working with ARS has afforded I will remember forever. I mean, a lot of these, there's one, it's not a quilt maker, but we have an artist in our collection named Ralph Griffin who made wood sculpture. And recently the DeYoung in San Francisco acquired several of his pieces and they're on display and they did this beautiful catalog. And we found his daughter who had no idea what had happened to the work that her dad had sold. She grew up thinking, being made fun of and, people around calling her dad crazy. And for her to find out that his work actually had ended up in this museum and that, her dad was being written about she was overjoyed.
That's really cool.
And moments like that, are super powerful. And I mean, in Gee's Bend, I think there's been a sort of reignition of appreciation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the women have died, and so now we're dealing with their children or their grandchildren.
Mm-hmm. And,
I think for a lot of them who were young or, maybe not interested in what was happening at the time, to go back with these books and bring photographs and say, this work is now in the collection of this major museum. There's going to be a catalog. And also, as her daughter or son or granddaughter, you have rights too, and you are now part of the story of this. I think is hope. I hope, and I think that it's, we're, sort of rekindling some of the really pride cool. that was.
And do you see them getting any revenue from these activities?
Yeah. There's been a few album covers that have been used. Certainly, just even, museums that have a photo of the quilt online, mm-hmm. they have to pay for that right. Mm-hmm. There's been like I said, the DeYoung did a catalog of their acquisition. The Met will have a catalog of their acquisition. The Ackland will have a catalog of their acquisition. So that is a source of revenue. Yeah. And one thing that ARS says, ARS is an amazing organization. If there are any artists who are not signed up, they totally should look into it, and I would recommend it. But ARS has a really active sort of marketing side of them where they go to design conferences and they, are on design newsletters and really promote the artists' work that they have licensing access to as a resource.
It's really interesting. That's super interesting. So you're giving, on your website it said that you're selling or finding places for a lot of the art now. Tell us a little bit more about what's happening with the foundation.
Yeah, so we are doing what we like to call an equal parts gift and purchase program, uh-huh. where we, about a year and a half ago, identified a group of museums in the country that, for different reasons, we thought would be suitable homes for some things in our collection, and we reach out to them. The process, like this was how it started, but now as these placements have been made, we have museums approaching us, and we've sort of tweaked the model in some instances, but essentially we reach out to museums that we are interested in working with and invite them, if they're interested, to submit a proposal to us and make a selection of work that they think would be ideal. And then working with us, my coworker and I and the appointed curators, we sort of go back and forth using their collection and their goals and their vision and putting together a group of work that, we think best will represent our collection within their collection and that they think will be a benefit to their museum collection.
Super interesting. Let me ask you a couple of copyright, IP related questions. When the quilts were first bought, were they buying the object, or were they also having the copyright assigned? Was there any kind of concept of so in copyright, the object and the copyright are distinct, so you could buy a painting but not the underlying copyright. So when those first from those first purchases, what was being bought exactly? Do you know?
Just the quilts.
Just the quilts. And so the copyright has always stayed with the families. Is that what's happened?
Yeah.
And then with Artist Rights Society,
as far as I know.
Yeah, and then with Artist Rights Society, then you can work with them on the copyright side, so people can use the quilts they may have the object, but they work with the families and the Artist Rights Society to clear copyright. Is that kind of the way it works?
Yeah, I mean, the artists or their family maintains copyrights. Like, we are definitely not in the business of taking away copyright. It's just that Artist Rights Society has the ability on behalf of the artist or their family to license the image.
Right.
So they'll see, but we are not, the foundation does not want to own the copyright of anything that we own. Right.
That's too messy. And so what you're doing by contacting the families is kind of facilitating. So these would be kind of orphan works without this. Like, you wouldn't really be able to either people would use them without getting permission, or it would be really hard to find permission. So your foundation has been able to facilitate the artist rights relationship to the copyright holders, and you help the copyright holders understand what it is so that they can connect and then potentially have revenue from the copyright. Is that right?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, so here's the last part. So so I am not in, we haven't even met about this, but a couple of the women here from one of the local shops went up to Gee's Bend. I guess they have workshops. Do they have workshops for people to learn how to quilt in the style of Gee's Bend, and they sing, and it's like a whole experience thing, right?
Yeah.
So a couple of a shop owner here and her friend went up and they experienced it, and they came back. And part of what's really interesting about these is that it seems from what they said is the Gee's Bend, they were learning a technique, so they came back and they taught a class in the technique, which I taught to sort of experience what they had experienced, like third hand or whatever. But one of the things that have gotten going is this idea, and we're supposed to have a meeting about it. I don't know, I think next week or sometime with the meeting. But the idea is to have Gee's Bend coming to New Orleans in terms of having the class and having people here and having a panel of conversations and all kinds of other things. So there's a group of 5 or 6 people who are super, even though it's our tricentennial and we're supposed to be focusing on New Orleans history, there's a group here that is way into Gee's Bend and is really interested in having something here that brings it to the city here for people to experience in a very kind of local way at Beecher Church and with the Quilt Guild and all of that. So I don't know exactly what they're planning. I said I would, I'm a law professor at Tulane, so I said, I'm happy to help in whatever way. I'm not sure what I would be doing, but I'm happy to help. And so I just sort of put that on your radar because I'm sure that they would love to chat with you and think through what it is what would be interesting and what hasn't been done. There's also, I guess, a play. Do you know about the play? They want to put the play on.
I've heard about the play. Well, I've forgotten that woman's name, but yeah, I've never seen the play, but I know it exists.
Yeah, so they want to get a local group to put the play on. They just want to have like a Gee's Bend festival kind of a week-long thing of everything G's Bend here.